According to the American Psychological Association, loneliness in the United States has reached levels that researchers are calling a public health crisis. But here's what the data doesn't capture: the millions of people who aren't lonely at all. People who chose this, people who looked at their phone, saw 20 unread messages, and felt nothing but relief when they put it face down. You know who you are. You didn't disappear because you hate people. You disappeared because you were exhausted from being everyone's emotional oxygen tank. And somewhere between the 100th conversation where you listened but were never truly heard, and the 1,000th time you held someone else together while quietly falling apart, you made a decision. Maybe not consciously, maybe it happened slowly, the way a tide pulls back. But you pulled back, and for the first time in a long time, you could breathe. This isn't about being cold. This isn't about being damaged. This is about something much more human than that. You weren't always like this. There was a version of you who showed up every time, for everyone. You were the one people called at midnight, the one who remembered everyone's problems, their anniversaries, their fears. You were the fixer, the peacekeeper, the person who made sure everyone else was okay before you even checked whether you were. You carried people, and you were good at it. So good that nobody thought to ask if it was getting heavy. But it was. The CDC has documented what researchers now call emotional burnout as one of the leading drivers of social withdrawal in America. In a culture that rewards availability, productivity, and constant connection, something quietly breaks in people who give too much for too long. Not dramatically, not all at once. It breaks the way a bridge erodes slowly, invisibly, until one day it simply cannot hold the weight anymore. That's not weakness, that's physics. Psychologists who study attachment behavior describe a pattern called emotional cutoff, a term first developed by family therapist Murray Bowen. It describes what happens when a person becomes so overwhelmed by the emotional demands of their relationships that the nervous system begins to treat closeness as a threat rather than a comfort. The brain, whose entire job is to keep you safe, starts to associate people with pain. And so it does what brains do. It creates distance. It builds walls, not because you stopped caring, but because caring became dangerous. And here's where it gets interesting. The nervous system doesn't know the difference between a threat and a person who asks too much of you. To your body, both feel the same. Your heart rate rises, your shoulders tighten. Your mind goes quiet in a way that looks like calm but is actually shut down. Researchers studying polyvagal theory describe this as a dorsal vagal response, the body's oldest protection system, going offline to preserve itself. It's the same mechanism that makes animals go still when cornered. You're not being difficult. Your body is doing something ancient and intelligent. This is also connected to what psychologists call avoidant attachment, a pattern that often forms early in childhoods where emotional needs weren't consistently met, where asking for comfort sometimes led to disappointment, or worse, made you feel like a burden. So you learned. You learned to need less. You learned to handle things yourself. You learned that the safest version of love is the kind you don't depend on. And that lesson followed you into adulthood, disguised as independence, disguised as strength, disguised as the person who doesn't need anyone. But here's the part nobody tells you. Cutting people off doesn't always come from a wounded place. Sometimes it comes from clarity. Sometimes, after years of performing closeness you didn't fully feel, you finally become honest about who actually fills you and who drains you completely dry. That's not avoidance, that's discernment. And the two can look identical from the outside, which is why people misread you. They call you cold when you're actually just honest. They call you distant when you're actually just done. There's a shift that happens often somewhere in your late 30s, 40s, or beyond that the American hustle culture never prepares you for. Energy becomes currency. You start doing the math differently. The math of who gets access to you. The math of which relationships cost more than they give. The emotional labor you once performed automatically starts to feel optional. And the moment it feels optional, something in you refuses to keep paying. You stop explaining yourself. This is the part that confuses people around you. They want the conversation, the closure, the reasons. And you've realized, maybe quietly, maybe painfully, that the explanation itself would cost you more energy than you have left to spend. So you go silent, not out of cruelty, out of conservation. Think of it like a thermostat set to protect itself. When a room gets too hot, the system shuts off. Not forever, just long enough to regulate. Your social withdrawal is your nervous system's thermostat. It's not a permanent statement about who you are. It's a temporary response to chronic overheat. Solitude, for people like you, isn't loneliness, it's maintenance. It's the quiet room where you can finally hear yourself think without the noise of everyone else's expectations filling every corner. It's the space where you remember who you are outside of what you do for other people. Without it, you don't just get tired. You start to disappear not from others, but from yourself. There's an important distinction worth sitting with. There's a difference between isolation, which is painful and involuntary, and solitude, which is chosen and restorative. There's a difference between emotional walls, which keep everything out, including what's good, and boundaries, which let the right things in while protecting what matters most. You may have needed walls once. They kept you safe when you had no other tools. But somewhere in that same body that built the walls is also the person who knows quietly which door might be worth opening again on your terms, in your time. That knowledge isn't gone, it's just resting. Because here's what's true about people who cut everyone off, or most everyone, or the ones who finally stopped being so available. You're not indifferent. You feel deeply. Sometimes too deeply. That's exactly why you pulled back. People who feel nothing don't need to protect themselves from feeling too much. The distance you've created isn't evidence of your coldness. It's evidence of your sensitivity. You learned, maybe the hard way, that peace is expensive. That stillness costs something in a world that mistakes busyness for worth. That not everyone deserves a seat at the table of your inner life, and that recognizing that isn't cruelty, it's clarity. You don't owe everyone access. Not to your time, not to your thoughts, not to your energy, not to the version of you that holds everything together. That version had to work very hard for a very long time, and she or he or they deserves the kind of quiet that actually heals something. So if you've pulled back from people lately, if your circle has gotten smaller and somehow life has gotten calmer, if you've stopped explaining yourself and started protecting your peace, you're not broken. You're not cold. You're not giving up on people. You're giving yourself something you should have been given a long time ago.